Okay, chapter 9 and 10 are the last 10 chapters in this almost 6-hour memoir, and it's only about my career. After leaving government service, I started a consulting engineering firm in 1970, right after I did the design of the security system for the World Trade Center. And these are some of the other outstanding assignments I've had in my 50-year career. And this is an overview, far from being complete, of some of the highs in my career and some of the really, really bad lows in my career. As I go down the list, I'll do it quickly. I designed the security system for over 500 schools, including some work with the Newtown School as a consultant, which I can't talk about. It was confidential. I invented a art guard painting protection system that was the most successful protection system for paintings ever invented. Got every museum in the country practically that had a problem. When there's about 100 major museums, I had about 80 of them. I designed the system for the World Trade Center in 1970, and that's how I got into business, which is a great story, which is in this chapter. I was a consultant on the nation's first anti-terrorism study group in 1985, and I predicted both the bombing of the basement in 1993 of the South Tower and the plane hitting both towers in 2001. I also authored the book Physical Security Practices and Technology that sold more copies than any other book in the field, and it was the first book on the security topic ever printed. I lectured in over 200 seminars and conferences during my career, and I was sued by an engineering. I sued an engineering firm for illegally using my professional engineering seal, and won a settlement of $200,000, which is described in this chapter. But of course, my lows, and I did so much work in Newark, New Jersey. I was investigated by the New York Jersey Attorney General for bribery, where I had to plead the Fifth Amendment. Interesting story. Then I was investigated by the New York City District Attorney for corruption, and I had a couple of people in the Board of Ed in New York were wearing microphones under their shirt when they interviewed me, trying to entrap me. Interesting story. And I also did the security system for a big Boston museum, and my system failed, and they lost $500 million in art. And that was 1991. It's still a mystery, largest theft in history, and it's because of my system failed. And of course, I never sold another system. And I was sued under the RICO statute in federal court in New York, and I lost a civil suit. Not a racketeer. I was not a racketeer. Interesting story. You have to read it. And I lost $2 million. So with my highs and my lows, you're wondering all these things that I achieved. Why aren't I a millionaire? Because I lived a very full life and had my ups and downs, as you see here. And now, if you're interested in my career, watch the rest of this almost 50-minute tape. And this is the kind of program that I've been doing. And here's the scene I just did. And I put it into the tape. And it gets very complicated. And I also took pictures on my iPhone, and I put that in. And it's really a complicated system. And I'm the only one, I think, that's qualified to handle this program, because no one else uses the DOS system anymore except me. And now let me show you.
Hey, Charlie, let me in.
Who's there?
Let me in.
Oh, who's there? Who's there? Come on in. Come on in.
Charlie, what happened?
Wait.
The studio. What's going on?
You want to take credit for this?
Hey, what do you mean? I was working hard this whole time.
That was Marcus Duran, who owns the studio and lets me use it. But I did all the programming, even though he wants to take credit. But look at the room over there. See, that's the room we did all the stops with. Okay, let's go in there. This is the studio where we do the actual taping. And when I say the taping, the blue screen behind me, as you'll see in a second, blocks out the scene behind me. So when I do editing, I can put anything else behind me, and it looks like I'm talking in front of a picture of another scene. And it's a very complicated editing procedure, and that's the camera that I'm staring at. But you can see that the whole studio is a very expensive studio, and I spent hundreds of hours here doing the memoir, and I had a cameraman, Marcos, who you just met, who handled the camera, but I did everything else.
Ready?
This is Lenny Goldstein, who's my classmate at Stevens, and he's going to tell an amazing story of how he put me in business. And let's see it, if you still remember it. It happened in 1970.
Okay.
You know, that's 47 years ago. And I was looking to get into business, and go ahead and
I'll
tell
try
what
to
happened.
remember it as best as I can.
Yeah.
I was working in security, so I was surveying various properties. I was working with Honeywell at the time, and surveying properties for fire alarm systems that were required by code and security systems. And I had a contact with the director of security for the World Trade Center.
Okay, stop there. And let me tell you what happened. Being somebody who doesn't like authority and I can't take orders, I quit the government because I couldn't stand civil service, and I went to work for an architect engineering firm. I didn't like my bosses or whatever. What Lenny is trying to say is that I left the government in 1968 and worked for an architect firm in New York City as one of the directors of engineering. Walter Kidder Constructors, a very large company. And then I decided I just couldn't work for anybody. I wanted to go into my own business. So in 1970, I contacted my classmate who was number one in my class. And I mentioned before in some of the other video clips, I'm last man in the class. So it was a great combination. He's the genius, I'm the personality. And we tried for a year while he was still working at Princeton and headed their plasma physics lab research, which is the largest research of any college in the country, and he was head of it. But he wanted to go into business too. But so I worked out of my house and did little odd jobs on engineering, and I got paid by the day. And after a year, we made presentations, made 8 presentations. He would drive up from Princeton and would make it. But we wanted anything. We went down to Washington once to see another classmate who was the assistant undersecretary of HUD. We wanted to do environmental studies or building anything. And we were really having trouble, but he was still working and I was making a buck. And those are the years I was single in the Hamptons with no money, but the women were treating me to everything. Anyway, when Lenny came in the picture, he told me about this building downtown called the World Trade Center by the Port Authority, and they were looking for a security study. No one has ever done a security study in 1970. There used to be retired cops who used to come in and just told people how many uniformed guards to put in the premises, or a locksmith would tell you what's the cheapest lock to put in the building. There were no engineers. So the Port Authority saw that missing link, and they put out bids, or they actually invited select people, and they didn't invite me. Lenny forced them to consider me and my partner. They invited Siskin Hennessy, Martin Marietta, Booz Allen, the largest companies, consulting companies in the world, because it's the biggest complex in the world, and the fee would be the biggest fee ever given for a consulting contract. And here I go in, and with my partner, my classmate, we never had a job. We always worked for somebody. We had no background except our own personal education. And we took about a year and 7 presentations working against these other companies. There must have been 150 to start, and they kept knocking out companies. And after a year of maybe 6 presentations, it got down to 3 of us. They really liked us. And the reason they liked us is because we had good backgrounds as individuals, but no company background. So it got down to 3 of us. They invited the 3 companies in. Siskin Hennessy, the biggest engineering company, Booz Allen, the second biggest in the world, and Charlie Schnabolk and his partner. And we were the first to go into the room. They're going to make the final decision. I mean, it was a miracle we got that far. And I talked to my partner. I said, how do we beat these guys? They're gigantic, they're multi-million-dollar companies. And here's what happened. We walked in. We looked at the panel of the head of the Port Authority, and everybody was there. It was the biggest contract ever awarded. And we said, we don't know anything about security. I don't know how to spell it. But neither do you, and neither do those 2 companies out there. They're giants, I know they are. They're fine companies. But if they win the contract, they're going to put 2 young engineers they just hired from some college, and they're going to be on it. You hire us, you get us, and we're going to hire consultants to help us in certain areas. And they awarded us, which is equivalent today to a $500,000 contract, the first really big security contract ever awarded by any company in the country. And that's how I stayed in business. My partner didn't want to do it. He was afraid of the next job coming. And I've been doing it for 48 years. He went back to Princeton, but we stayed friends for a long time. Anyway, that's the beginning of my business career, which you're going to describe in the rest of this section of my memoir. Lenny, I'm taking you to dinner for giving me.
But I'm paying.
Oh, you're paying?
Tonight.
All right, that's even better. Anyway, it was wonderful seeing you and bringing back memories.
Okay, we're ready to go.
And the rest of this taping, I'm going to talk about other things I did in my career.
But we're finished.
But we're finished.
Okay.
We get out of here. Okay, let's go.
Take your stuff, whatever you want to take. You come back, you'll drop me off here. Yep.
Wait.
You want to go to a diner? You want to go to a restaurant?
I want to go to a restaurant.
You want to go to a restaurant?
Okay, now I'm a one-man consultant, and I'm working with my partner for 1 year. But after that, I was now married, and I was able now to support the family. But up till now, that first year, my wife was supporting me as a speech therapist with the Board of Ed, and we had 3 kids right away. And now I'm in business and looking for other jobs based on that great start. But I had to get exposure. You don't advertise yourself as a consulting engineer. You got to speak at seminars, symposiums, and you got to lecture. You got to get people to put you on the program or start your own, which I did. I'll talk about that later. And also, you have to write articles in the trade magazines, the professional magazines to get attention. When I finished the study, I immediately was interviewed by McGraw-Hill's most famous engineering magazine, Engineering News Record, and it was a cover story on the security study I did for Building Magazine, circulated all over to 100,000 engineers. And the lead story, as you can see here inside the magazine, is the story about my profile of myself and the story of my work on the right. See, there's a profile of me on the left, and this really set me as number one in the field of security immediately. And I did both. I went up as soon as after that 1 year, I was looking, of course, I'm in the security industry, I'm getting all the publications in that field, and it's brand new. I mean, there was nobody in the field except me and one magazine. Today, 47 years later, there's 100,000 people in the Homeland Security Department in Washington. There's probably 250,000 people in security. 1970, me. That was it. So the first thing I did, I noticed right away on some of the seminars, people are starting to talk about it. And the largest seminar or organization that deals with educating corporate heads and giving training programs is the American Management Association. They have seminars constantly on every subject that enlist their corporate members. And I noticed that they had the security in high-rise buildings or some subject, and it was a brochure that I have here. And it said it's going to be done in another 2 months. They're going to have the presentation in a big hotel in New York. So I went up to the AMA, the American Management Association office, and I met the program director. His name is Ed Marcus, who is a part of another part of this story. And I told him I want to speak, and I just did the World Trade Center, and I'm a great speaker. After all, I mean, I was a Toastmaster, and I was a writer. And he said, well, we already had the program, and he says, when you do a seminar, you got to have people with titles, even if they're lousy speakers. Like we have the keynote speaker is the head of the American Society of Security Directors. We have a title like that. And other speakers is the assistant head of the crime prevention unit for the New York City Police Department. And I said, no, all right, I don't have any title yet, but I'm a good speaker. He said, well, I'll tell you what, a young guy my age, bachelor, which is part of the rest of the story. And we did become friends. He said, I'll put you on at 4 o'clock. And he said, remember, they're there all day and they're going to start to leave. But that's the best I can do as a favor, because you did the World Trade Center, it should be of some interest. So the day comes, and it was too late to put me on the program printing, but I'm there at the seminar, and there's over 100 people there, and all big shots from big corporations. And he's right, at about 4 o'clock, everybody's starting to leave, and I stood up, and I said, hold it. If you stay and listen to me, I'm buying you a drink. And everybody sat down, and I gave the speech of my life. And I spoke at many, many seminars sponsored by that organization and others. I must have, in my 48-year career, I would say 500, 600 seminars. And that's how you start in business. And those seminars lead to contracts. Now, part of my promotion is to write articles in publications, and I like to write because I learned how to write when I worked for the Long Branch paper in New Jersey, and I started to write articles. And it was a little shocking because there was no one writing articles like mine, because I didn't represent any company. I represented me, so I can attack people and get attention. And the publishers loved my articles. And also I found out that the more publishing magazines out there who do 20 articles a month, they run out of things to write about, so that they need material. So I found the largest magazine in the field. And this is 1 or 2 years after I had the World Trade Center. And it was Security Magazine. That's the title of it. Now there are 50 magazines. That was the biggest one, and maybe one of the only. And I wrote an article that you're going to see behind me, and it's called Protection Against the Guard Force. Because you mentioned that my competition were cops, and they only talked about contract guards, and contract guards were useless. Now they do some training, but they're still like sleepy watchmen. You know, a guard is a rent-a-cop, you know, or rent the uniform. There's no brains behind it. So I wrote the article, and in it I mentioned if you hire a contract guard, and if you want him to be a live mannequin, it's $8 an hour. If you want him to be able to read, it's $10 an hour. You see this behind me. And understand is $13, and cable $16. I mean, really sarcastic. And I also say, when you hire a guard service, the guards are no training at all, and they show up disheveled or late, and they fire them because the company that they're renting the cop to or the guard to says get rid of them. When they get rid of them, they put them at another site where they didn't like the guard, and they just switch drunks, is what I'm saying. But to back it up, the publisher was a little nervous, so I said, well, here's what I did. I went to my friend who owned a luncheonette in New York, and I said, look, I'm going to apply for a job, and they're going to call you up. I'm going to say I'm a short order cook. So there was an ad in the paper that Burns Rent Security Guard Service that has guards that they rent out is having employment applications received. They're going to hire people, and they rented a room on 42nd Street, a big auditorium that seats about 200 people. So now I had a way of putting down a fake name and saying I work in this luncheonette as a chef. So I go into the room, and there's 200 people in it. Each one looked like they just came out of Rikers Island, which they probably did, or a flop house on the Bowery. I mean, they were bad, but that's what you got, especially in those days. Now they're better trained and there's licenses, but this is the 1970s. So the lady gives out the applications. There were about, let's say 150, I exaggerated, 200. So we get the application, no kidding, there's no joke. The guy next to me says, what does this mean, sex? You know, the application, sex? I said, put down occasionally. He put it down. I mean, that's the kind of mentality. So I said, holy shit, I'll be here all day. You know, I got there at 8:30. And everybody had the applications, and they're all reading, trying to write, scribbling. And a man comes out in a suit out of the side door, and there's only one lady at the desk in the front of the room, and just us. There's no one else in there. He walks over to the lady, and he says in a loud voice, all right, Miss Jones, tell them to line up after they fill out the form. We're going to do the lie detector test to see if they have a police record. Which is illegal, by the way. You can't do pre-hiring and look up a person's background. As soon as he finished that sentence, 180 people knocked me over, running out of the room. I mean, they left. They all have police records. I'm left, there's 20 of us. This is now an hour I'm there. I got hired on the spot. That's how I wrote this article. And they put me in a retail clothing store about 11 o'clock for the $8 an hour. I think, well, actually, that's the price a little higher than I got. But I worked there for about 2 hours, and I quit and wrote the article. And this article was so sensational that Burns, Pinkerton, Wackenhut, the biggest guard services in the country, sued me. I'm only in business for a year. I had no money. And the magazine for $1 million. And the publisher called up, and he said, oh, my God. So what he did is he called up these people, and he said, oh, you know, he's going to write rebuttals about the article, and they all took their ads out. But my article was truthful, and it got me attention and contracts you couldn't believe. So between that American Management Association, and I keep writing articles like this. In fact, you're going to see in a few minutes, I'm going to talk about how I got sued and lost $2 million for some other articles I wrote. Sometimes it doesn't work out well, but at least I was above the radar because of these two things. And also, among the response to these articles and these seminars I spoke at, I was called by the predecessor to what we call today 60 Minutes on Channel 2, CBS. There was one on NBC before that called First Tuesday, and they asked me to speak when there was some kind of a robbery, a big robbery in New York, to speak about it as an expert, and I got on national television, which, equivalent to the 60 Minutes program, and here's a picture, the only picture I got left of that. That directly led to teaching assignments. Everybody in colleges now that had a criminal justice department wanted to teach something about security, and I'm the only one around, meaning the only one that likes to speak. And speaking at a college and having my articles published, the World Trade Center, it really looked good on my resume, and my business really was booming, and because I really put a lot of effort into it. Now, the college experiences was typical of my personality. It sometimes is not quite understood. Now, my first teaching position was in Jersey City University, which is had one of the country's first criminal justice department, and they wanted me to teach a course on security, the first one in the program, the first one in the United States. And I'd say about 1978, 79. So I taught the course. There was absolutely no written material on it except my articles. There were no books. But I taught the course using a catalog from a corporation that made door locks. I mean, and I went through it, and I had guest speakers come in that were security directors in New York City who were thrilled to do it, and of course they gave me contracts because they were able to speak and tell people he spoke at college. So now, that 1978, 76, there were some riots going around on campuses, and the government, in their infinite wisdom, started a program to pay tuition for cops to get an education, and meaning putting them on the campus without paying them to be a hired cop or a guard. In other words, they were in classes. It was called the LEAP program, the Law Enforcement Educational Program the government put out in the late 70s because of the Vietnam War and so forth, reaction. Anyway, so this is Jersey City, and when you teach the LEAP program, most of my students were cops, active cops on the police force in Jersey City. So because so this is Jersey City, and when you teach the LEAP program, most of my students were cops, active cops on the police force in Jersey City. So because of that, I had to teach the course twice in 1 week. I taught it like Tuesday morning, and I taught the same thing Thursday night because the cops were in court or they're on duty. So they had to go. Now, why the cops like to go into colleges? They didn't. The government didn't pay for the tuition. They gave them $400 a month, and the tuition at Jersey City College was free. Almost free. So it was like an income. So they would go, and some of them did get a degree, I guess, but most of them went for the extra money. They got paid and they had to show up because I was forced to take an attendance. So one night, in the middle of the winter, a cold night, I'm teaching the course from 7 to 9:30. I had to do 2.5 hours because it's a 2-day course in 1 day. And I'm in the room with 40 people, packed. They all came because they knew that night I'm teaching lockpicking. And I actually, have lockpicks that I come into the class with, and I show them how to use a lockpick and how to pick a lock. And I have a little model that if I can show it later on, where I pick the lock and they take turns showing, and I show them how to do it. So the class starts at 7. I get the lockpicking part done around 8:30, but we still have an hour to go. So we take a break. Now this is at night in the winter, and I'm the only class open in the building. It's the administration building at heat. The classroom building's in. So it's on the second floor. And I take what we call a stretch break. So the police or the class go out in the stretch in the hallway, and I have all this lock-picking stuff or demonstration on the table. And I walk around, I talk to the students, and I said, okay, it's 1:45. And I said, let's start and get this over with, it's cold out. And in comes running one of my students, 2 of them. One of them has a jacket, a man's suit jacket on his arm. And I said, what happened? He said, we took the picks off your desk, and we went down the hall, and we picked the door. It said like Vice President Administration or something. And we took the jacket, just to show you, But the one man got away with the jacket, but the other guy was caught. And we go down the hall, 20 of us. Well, no, more, maybe 40 of us, or 40, come marching down the hall, and this kid who was a part-time security guard at night of the campus was trying to frisk my student, and he was dropping his walkie-talkie. He never arrested anybody before. And I said, what are you doing? What are you doing? He said, I caught this guy picking a lock, because we have the jacket in the room. I said, wait a minute, he's my student, and I was teaching him, and I said, look, calm down, we're gonna almost done with the class, forget about it. He said, I can't. So he calls up the supervisor. So in other words, there's one supervisor and one guard on duty. So the supervisor comes up, it's going like a half hour already. So the supervisor comes up and the story's explained, and I said, it's misunderstanding. I said, why don't you sit in the class? I'm almost done, and it's a pretty interesting class. And he gets rid of the guard, and my student that was arrested comes back with us into the room, and in the front row is the supervisor. And he's sitting, I went through, everybody was quiet. They all sat quietly. And I went through the half hour left in the class, and at 9:30, I shook his hand, and I said, just forget about it. He said, yeah, no, it was really interesting. So he walked out of the class. It's 9:30, it's a storm outside in the middle of the winter, and nobody moves. And I'm putting everything away carefully so nobody steals my lockpicks again. And I look around and I see all of them, and I said, what the hell you doing here? He said, hey, professor, we still got the freaking sport jacket. We got to put it back. What do you mean put it back? He said, we're going to pick the door again. I said, look, I can't get involved with this thing. I'm just going to turn my back and do what you want. But I said, and it's like a Broadway show. I swear to God, here's my word. If you get caught again, they're going to call up the Jersey City police. And with that, as if we rehearsed it, they all open up their jacket. They all got guns. I got 80% of the police force in the class. There's only about 6 cops in Jersey City left. I got the whole police force. They said, who's going to come? We are the police force. I said, I don't want to know nothing. So I turned my back, I don't want to know anything. I mean, I'm starting to laugh over the thing too. They say, holy crap. And I figured they had to pick the lock to get in. To get the jacket, they could certainly put it back. Now, it's fate, and it's my life story, really. That rainy night at 9 o'clock at night, 9:30 now, they had the monthly meeting of all the faculty. And the dean, that's the office we were in, that took the jacket, he forgot his Lackawanna Railroad ticket. I mean, it happened once in a lifetime. He lives in Jersey City, he goes to a suburb on a train. He comes running up to the second floor of his office to get the goddamn lock. And here we are, picking the lock to get in, holding his jacket. He, of course, thinks we're going out with his jacket. And then he had to call up, he couldn't call the police, had to call the same security guy again that was on the staff. And all hell, we gave him his jacket, we tried to explain to him, but it was reported to the president of the university, and he fired me. I got fired. I got fired other times too, but that was the first time in a college. I'll tell you more. So the president fired me for teaching lockpicking to students, but he couldn't take my name out of the catalog for the next term. It was already in for my class. So this is the winter season, so the next term is going to start soon. 1,400 students signed up for my next class when they heard what happened. But that was the end of my career at Jersey City. But immediately, Rutgers University hired me, and they heard about it. Everybody heard about this story. And I was told that they gave me, instead of an adjunct salary, an adjunct professor, they made me an associate professor because I wanted more money. They don't pay adjuncts anything even today. So I was hired by Rutgers to teach a security course, but to do it a little more gently. After that Jersey City University experience, I realized the great interest that overwhelms most of the cops and the students that I have come across. So I started an academy for lockpicking designed specifically for felons and other criminal types found on most college campuses. And here's a typical class you're going to see now. Oh, welcome. I'm glad you came to the Lockpicking Academy, and I think you're going to have a memorable experience. And it's a very fast-paced class, so you got to pay attention, take notes, and I encourage you to ask questions. But when you ask a question, you got to tell me your name, whatever name you use that you give to the police. And we're going to now talk about the class that you're going to sit through this morning. And I think you're going to have an experience you're never going to forget. And I think you all know the rules of this class. First of all, you all paid $1,000 to attend at the meeting, and you all met the requirements, I understand. For enrolling, they required each of you to prove that you were convicted felons, there's at least 3 of you are, or had at least 20 arrests or 4 indictments on your record, or 2 of you are out on parole. That's the only requirement I asked to come to this. Now, the other classes we hold, at one of you, I saw another class, we also teach you how to counterfeit credit cards. Here's 2. One of them is legitimate, and the other is counterfeit. And I can get into this room with the counterfeit one, which I'll show you during the slide presentation. And we'll teach you about money laundering techniques and where to buy and sell fake pot. Because some people ask me for that special knowledge, and I have all the addresses. There's no other educational program like this in the United States. Anybody else that knows what I know is in jail, which I was for many years. In fact, I have a photographer doing this class. He's only on a parole about 6 months. I know him for years. He's an expert lockpicker, so he knows how to do it. In case you have any questions, you can ask him also. During the lecture, remember, you have to tell me your current name and give me the question. And upon completion of this course, and this is like a guarantee, you can pick any lock, 80% of the appliance stores in New York City, and as well as every Duane Reade in the Upper East Side and the Upper West Side. I know because I tested each front door myself. Now we're ready to begin. You got to be quiet and you got to ask questions, but I want you to pay strict attention.
License plate, so when you're driving away, the camera can't see and get your license plate. So I thought that would be interesting to share.
Among the devices I sell that can be used for criminal activity or honest activity is, beside lockpicking, are license plates. This is the one that you put over your license plate, like my student showed, and when the camera up on the pole flashes as you pass the red light, the flash washes out the sign of the license plate, and it's $25, and it's on my YouTube, and I can sell you up to 5 at a time because of certain state laws.
I'm Gloria Madonna. Professor, you look familiar.
Well, I don't recognize you, really.
Should we wear disguises when picking the lock?
Well, that's funny you asked that. I do. I always have a disguise. Pick and bounce the pins, and then I'm going to try to turn it, but it may take a while, but it may take a second. So here we're going. Then you're going to do it. Now I noticed, I showed you before, I locked it that way, so now I'm going to turn it this way to open it. I locked it that way, which I know how to do it, so now I'm going to turn it the other way. So I put the pick in. And you're going to do this in a second. I put the pick and I bounce the pin. And I go back and I use a tension wrench. And that means just what it says. I'm putting a little tension on it. And I'm going to turn it. I just picked Duane Reade. Every Duane Reade. First, let's lock it. All right, now let me interrupt for a second because you're doing so well. Every one of you can learn to pick. remember that for the next couple of days, and if you buy the lock picks and you're trying it at a store or in this neighborhood in Hoboken, and you get caught by somebody, particularly a cop, don't get nervous. Tell them you're doing homework for an academy and this is part of your assignment. As stupid as it sounds, half the time the cop will believe you and walk away. You got to try something crazy because you're caught picking a lock. So say something that at least you don't look like you're really a crook. All right, now we're going to lock the door. And we're going to turn it this way, I guess. Wait a minute. You got to
That's fine.
Okay. It's got to go that way. That's down, that's in. Go ahead. Put that in. Bounce it, bounce it. Holy Christ. He did it in 2 seconds. I sold the book and a set of lockpicks to whoever wanted. I sold hundreds of them. And if you don't want to buy it from me and you say, well, that's illegal, you go on the internet. There's 500 companies selling lockpicks. And my biggest sale is when I used to teach once a year to the New York City Crime Prevention Bureau in New York at their annual training session. And I used to train 100 cops at a time. All 100 bought the lockpicks because they didn't know where else to get them. So I made a business selling lockpicks. So I taught at the Newark campus and the New Brunswick campus. They have 2 campuses, and one term in Newark, one term, and I taught like a year there, 2 classes, 2 terms. And on the second term, I gave out an assignment. I did lockpicking, but I made sure I kept everything to myself, and nobody stole anything. And at Rutgers, I gave out an assignment, and it said, I want you all, since you're college graduates, and we have to know what felons think. I mean, they're getting educated to rob places. You must be smarter than them, and you're taking my course on how to use alarm systems. I want you to rob a bank in Newark. But when you write the paper for your homework assignment, your term assignment actually, I don't want you to use guns. I want you to rob the bank with a unique college-educated, crooked idea. So the papers came in, they were really wild. And one of them was outstanding. He was going to rob the canceled checks. It's just paper. It's worth about $12. That's petty larceny. But banks at night, at 5 o'clock, when everybody's done banking, they can clear everything by taking it to a central bank somewhere in Jersey where they exchange the checks with other banks. But if you steal the goddamn checks, there's no way of balancing it. I mean, I'm making it quick. So he wrote the story, and I wrote a letter. I called up some people. And the major organization in the banking field is called the American Banking Association. Very subdued, but they got a kick out of the story. And here's the magazine, and here's the story behind me. And it was published on how to rob a bank. And that picture you see behind me, that they took it from a Woody Allen movie, that became a sensation. I mean, every bank magazine beside that one reprinted it. They thought it was great, except the president of the American Bank, he didn't think so. He thinks it's wrong to teach students to rang a bank. He's an idiot. He calls up the president of Rutgers. I was fired again. So I'm getting a reputation. Now, with all my involvement with the police in Jersey and in New York City and whatever, but mostly in Jersey because they took my class at Rutgers and at Jersey City University. So they were cops that wanted to go into security when they retire, and they told their chiefs of the police station, the chief of the police department in their town, that I'm a speaker and whatever, and the chiefs of police are all ready to retire, and they want to learn more about security, and they have a conference every year in Atlantic City. And they're, surprisingly, New Jersey is kind of maybe it's typical of all the states, but I doubt it. Every 10 blocks is another town. Like I live in Guttenberg, and it's 4 blocks wide and 10 blocks long, and it's got 12 cops, and it has a chief. And the next town is 10 blocks wide. It has a chief. There are 600 chiefs or 600 cities in New Jersey. I mean, they should combine, but they don't. Some of them have 10 cops. So anyway, They got a hold of my resume. I forgot the details, who was running it. It was in June in Atlantic City every year. And they get all the chiefs go down there. Like out of the 600, 500 show up. The chief doesn't make it. He doesn't send his assistant. They're very snobby. Only the chiefs show up. So I show up, and I'm supposed to speak at 11 o'clock. And they have all these speakers speaking all day. They have the head of the state troopers. They have the governor of New Jersey, who was burned at that time. They have somebody from other agencies, all big-name people speaking all day. And in the back room, next to where you have the conference, the next room is an exhibit area where they have police cars, which they're selling sirens, handcuffs. They're selling stuff that cops buy. It's like a show and a conference and a lecture series. And I'm the speaker at 11 o'clock on security, which is before everybody runs out to go to the beach, so it's hard to get them at 11. So I start speaking at 11, and the cops are in the next room looking at the exhibits, and I start doing my little gimmick with the lockpicking, and in 15 minutes they're running out to the conference room, or the exhibit room, and bringing people in. So the room was filled. The room was filled like 150 chiefs, and I'm doing my whole thing. And they're really impressed with it. But I'm in a hurry, too, because at 12 o'clock I'm going to the beach with my kids. It was a vacation weekend beside the fee I got. So I'm cleaning up all the lock-picking stuff, and I'm on a podium, so everybody is much lower than me. All the cops coming up and congratulating, giving me their cards, and I'm giving them their cards in case they need a consultant in their town. And a little guy comes up with a pad and pencil, and he says he's from the Atlantic City Press. And he says to me, with all the people around me crowding and all this, I was really overwhelmed a little bit. And he says, how'd you get into this business? So everybody's looking around laughing. I said, well, I used to be a thief, in prison. I learned all this stuff. And I'm using it now to solve all the problems. And all the chiefs of police are laughing. They're all laughing. The next day, on the Atlantic City Press, the governor's speech is on page 18. The chief of the state troopers is on page 22. And on the front page, there I am, and here's the headline that they made me describe my abilities. And because of that, the cops and the chiefs in the room the next day, really apologetic, they said, I can't write a rebuttal, it'll only make it worse. They said, just forget about it, and we'll make it up to you. And out of that apology, I got 20 to 30 jobs out of the little towns to do security studies. But I'm still stigmatized as an ex-crook because of that goddamn headline. And I got two, or maybe more, but two significant jobs out of that bank article, in spite of what the president of the organization thought of me. One was with that time was a huge chain called Chemical Bank, which was swallowed up and is now called Chase, took over Chemical. But they had about 200 branches, and they called me up about upgrading security in the bank based on that article. So I did a study on how to do it, and in the study I revolutionized how banks think about security. I designed with cameras and so forth. It was like for all their 200 branches, it cost them like $20 million or whatever. It was a lot of money, a lot of branches to put in all the equipment I designed. But then I told them, with all this equipment, you don't need a guard in the lobby. They all had guards. In fact, somehow many banks still have it. But I told Chemical Bank, you don't need guards, and you would save $4 million a year, which more than pays for the bank installation of the equipment, because the equipment is you purchase it once for $20 million, and you save $10 million every year recurring. So that was I got rid of all the guards, because the money they saved balanced against the robbery. Remember, the average robbery is about $400. The guy that's giving out mortgages upstairs is making a mistake for $10 million and no one notices it. And when you steal as an executive in a bank, by the way, it's bad publicity. You don't get fired. You just get moved to another division. You never get fired for stealing in a bank. So they're so corrupt, they took my advice, got rid of all their guards. The other one was made Newsweek magazine, among other publications, who interviewed me. And I'm going to tell you what happened. It was Banco Popular. That's a Spanish-speaking bank from Puerto Rico all over New York, in Brooklyn, where they have a lot of Spanish-speaking from the islands. And they were having a little problem because they were hiring tellers that spoke Spanish only, some of them. Some of the executives too. And what happens when a robber comes in, he's not a professional, especially a little branch in Brooklyn, Banco Popular. How much money can they have? He would come in and say, with a scribbled note, there's a holdup, I'll kill you if you don't give me the money. you could only read it in English, and he would hand it to the teller who couldn't read it at all. She's Spanish speaking. So in 2 occasions, the bank robber is shaking because he's nervous. He didn't really have a gun probably, we don't know. And he says to the girl, this is the Williamsburg branch. And I'm not, and then they hired me as the consultant. And so this is all a true story that I'm telling you about. They had to tell me all this. She couldn't read the note, so she took it. She said, "Un momento," and she walked past 6 other tellers to go to an executive. And she says, "¿Cuántos usted?" And he says, in Spanish, "You're getting robbed. Give him the money." Oh. So she walks back. She says, gracias. She walks back, and he gives the money to the guard. Then they rang the alarm and so forth, but he got away. But what happened is they really got scared, because what if he thought she was being, wise guy and not giving him the money because she couldn't understand him. She doesn't speak English. So this became an article in a couple of magazines, but it was the biggest one was Newsweek magazine. And the article is right behind me. And they put this in all their 30 branches in New York City, and I got $6,000 for writing this. These seals, there's my professional engineer license and the master electrical license are really very legal. I mean, they're very important, and it's illegal to use these seals unless it's the person who's using it is the one who's the recipient. It's like, a better example, you can't call yourself a doctor unless you have a medical license. A lawyer has to be a lawyer. I mean, he has to have a license to practice law. And I can go on to other professions like that. You cannot use this seal if you're not that person. It's fraudulent. You go to jail. And this is what happened, which became one of the biggest stories in New York City Board of Education years ago. What happened is I got a call one morning. One day, around 1990, he called me up and told me, "What happened, Joe? What happened, 1990?
What happened was that Charlie at the time specialized in security systems, high-tech security systems. He designed and installed them. And I received a set of drawings from a contractor that had Charlie's engineering seal on them, and it was totally unrelated work. And I was very suspicious that Charlie didn't design that, and I called him to ask him what was going on. He asked me who the contractor was, what names were on the drawing, and he told me, "Hey, that's not mine, I didn't seal it." I said, "Well, it's your seal. I know your seal very well. I've seen it in the past." All right, so Charlie then came to my office the following day, looked at the drawings, and still insisted it was not his.
And I was one of the biggest contractors in the New York City Board of Ed, so I know all the big shots there. I mean, I did all their new buildings with the alarm systems and consulting and using my seal. Now, these seals that are in, you buy in a stationery store. Okay, you show them your certificate that you got from the state of New York or New Jersey, which I happen to have a seal for New York and New Jersey. Each state has their own exam and their own tests, and it's very hard to get. Besides being a college graduate, you got to have experience for like 4 or 5 years, and you got to take a 2-day test, which half the people fail the first time. So I got a call from the director of engineering. He's the highest engineer in the Board of Ed, with its 1,000 schools, which I've been doing work for 10 years. So I know him. I know everybody. I know him personally. His name is Joe Tantillo, which you're going to see where I interviewed him about this. And he calls me on a Monday morning around 10 o'clock. The time is very important. And he said, "Charlie, I got these drawings for the plumbing of this new school, 25 drawings. And they're all wrong. I mean, there's a lot of error, and the plumber is standing here with me to approve the drawings with your seal on it." I said, "How the hell did you notice it?" I said, "Because he said they were wrong, so I wanted to see who's the professional engineer." I said, "Joe, don't say anything. Is he still standing there?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Joe, I don't use my seal except for my own drawings. And I don't even know how a flush armor works in a toilet. What do I know about plumbing?" Ask him calmly, with you on the phone, where did he get the drawing sealed? And I listened on the phone at my end, and it turns out he goes to a company in Queens that sealed the drawing and then delivers it to the building department to get a permit. I mean, that's a felony. That's serious. That's time in jail. And I said, Joe, what is the name of the company he goes to? And he gives me Lucand. I still remember it, Lusan, way out in Flushing. I said, tell him calmly that these drawings are not acceptable, and he has to do them over again and correct the error. So he walks out. I can hear on the one end of the conversation, and Joe says, what are you going to do? I said, that damn thing is illegal. I said to Joe, do you know a lawyer? He said, yeah. He's an ex-controller of a lawyer under Mayor Beam in New York City. He was the controller for the city or something with the city. He said, everybody recommends him. So this is like 10 o'clock in the morning. So I call up the lawyer, Ted Gilbert, who's semi-retired, but he still has a law office, and he does some special work. And I called him up and said that I was referred to him by Joe Tantillo, the chief engineer of the New York Board of Ed, and somebody's using my seal. He says, holy mackerel. He said, so I said, what do I do? He says, well, we're going to put him in jail, and we're going to get a big fine out of him. So he said on the phone, come over, send me, I think he said, come over with all the information. So right away, I got to his office around 12 o'clock. And I told him and I showed him my seal, and I explained to him how important a license, a professional engineer license. He said, I'll take care of it. I said, well, how much are you going to charge me? Expecting he's going to take a third if I win any kind of money. He said, hey, Charlie, I'm too old. I want $200 an hour. This is not 1991, and he was an independent guy, already on pension. So I said, all right. I said, you sure? I said, yes. He said, I'm not sure where this is going to go, but I'm going to start the action. So I left. And it turns out he filled out the form, went down to the court in Queens, and got a subpoena for the man. He's going to hand him a subpoena and have him appear in court on that following Thursday to answer my claim, my petition for him illegally, and he'll go to jail. So what happened is, once he fills that all out and gets the court date, he hires a man who serves, a summons server, who serves people summons. You see that on television all the time. And it turns out the guy has the office in Flushing, and the server got there at a little after 5, and the store was closed. There was an office on the front storefront, but we already knew, or they already knew where he lived. So the guy with the server went out to out Long Island to where the guy's home is, and the guy wasn't there, but the server is getting paid for this. Waited till about 11 o'clock at night when the guy came home, and he served him the subpoena to appear in court Thursday. Just the same Monday this is all happening. So Tuesday morning, my lawyer calls me up. He says, they just called. They want to have a meeting today with his lawyers, and he's going to come in at 2 o'clock. So I said, I'll be there. He said, yeah, be there, but I want you to go to my office, and I'm going to talk to him in the conference room. So 2 o'clock I show up, and he said he sits me in his office, and he goes out and then into the conference room at 2 o'clock with the 2 lawyers that the guy I'm suing or trying to put in jail and negotiate. And my lawyer keeps coming back and tells him that the offer they're going to give me if I take back the subpoena and the claim. And by 4 o'clock, my lawyer agrees to the term. But let me explain again what is so easy to do and it's so illegal. This is the seal. And what you do is you seal all the drawings to get a permit from the city, or you submit the application and you press it down so you can hardly read it. No one ever reads these things. That's what was such a shock that the Board of Ed contacted me. And then the engineer signs his name over it. And I scribble it. You can't even read that. And nobody would read it on a drawing anyway. They assume that, it's embossed and it's official. And that's what the whole trick is. People should read it a little more carefully. So at 4 o'clock, we settled, and we're not going to go through with the court case. We're going to remove our petition. And in one day and 5 hours, it's Tuesday, I won $200,000 from Lucien, the thing. So I never met him. I never met his lawyers. It was all done in 2 different rooms. So my lawyer comes to me and said, Charlie, we won, and they're going to get the money this week, and congratulations. So I said, Ted Gilpin, the lawyer, how long did you work on this thing? Well, he said, I did 2-3 hours yesterday, and 3 hours today, 5 hours. So $300, I owe you $1,500, and you just won me $200,000. He said, Charlie, I might have talked too quickly. Have a heart, have a heart. And he was almost crying. You know, the guy is, you know, that time he was in his 80s. So I gave him $10,000. And I gave the man, the engineer from the Board of Ed, I gave him a couple of $1,000s for catching the name. So in one day, I paid for the tuition for 2 of my kids.